Hi everyone, good evening, good morning from wherever you are present. This is Nindadri Chaudhary, Chief Organizer for the DevOps India Summit. And it's an honor to have all of you in this panel. And we are going to discuss a very important aspect today, which is convergence of CI/CD and SRE-led automation in production. Very recently, I heard somebody very senior making a comment. He's saying that CD is continuous delivery to development platform and not a development environment, not to production environment. That's what is happening. So thought that let me get all of your ideas as to what is the thought process for all of you. Before we start, I'm not going to introduce you again because you already have been introduced by the MC. So we have Rajan Pillai from TCS. We have Navya Dwarkanath from Catchpoint. We have Shantanu Bhattacharjee from Accenture. We have Mark Hornbeck from Engineering DevOps Consulting. And we have Nityanand Mehta. And if you can just tell again the name of your organization.
Right. So I think the confusion is because I just moved from Catchpoint. So I'm from WebScale Networks.
Okay, great. So welcome all of you for this session. So the first question that I have, or rather the thought process that I have, is that everybody is talking about CI/CD and everybody is talking about SRE. So you have DevOps on one side, you have SRE on one side. Somebody is talking about SRE to be the purest form of DevOps. Google talking about SRE complementing DevOps. What do you see as from the tools perspective, how do you see DevOps, SRE, both the tools converging together to make it into a continuous delivery in the true sense? So I'll start with Mark Hornbeck.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm personally of the opinion that SRE and DevOps are complementary, and it's an oversimplification to say that SRE is just a pure implementation of DevOps, because DevOps is primarily about accomplishing continuous delivery. So really it is a big D in truth and a little bit of O, little O, getting to delivery. Whereas SRE is approaching to some extent the same problem, but from the other angle, more from an operations point of view. So it's more about it, imparting the requirements, what they call the wisdom of production, further left in the value stream. And certainly there are overlaps in terms of practices and therefore tools as well. So certainly things like monitoring tools, it would be helpful if both the development side and the operations side were using some consistent monitoring tools so they can have consistent metrics. On the SRE side, the service level objectives and indicators. If there's going to be an agreement about how to work with things like air budgets and so on, then the dev side needs to agree as well. So that's an area where there needs to be a convergence of tools and measurement methodologies in general, not to mention the, what's being measured. Other than that, a lot of talk about automation. In the SRE environment, it's all about automating operations toil and things like the deployment processes and things that are happening after deployment. And of course, on the DevOps side, it's a lot about automation as well. So if there could be an agreement about what automation tools and languages are being used, it would make it a lot easier for a collaboration to occur between the DevOps folks and the SRE people. So in reality, I think SRE is still in an early stage, certainly at least in my own consulting practice. The clients that I'm dealing with are mostly just getting started with SRE, and they're further along with DevOps, but certainly not, at a high level of maturity, most of them either. But I do see that as they get to, let's say, at least continuous flow or close to that, they start talking more about the requirement for SRE. And then this idea of aligning tools becomes more important. They start to realize the value of that. So those are just some examples.
Sure. So from here, I'll go to Rajan to understand what his thoughts are, because he's coming from a service provider side and would like to understand what he feels about it.
Yeah, so today, if you look at, see, from a large organization's perspective, what we are seeing is either they are looking at DevOps as an implementation model, and then looking at, say, SRE as a more on the infrastructure services side to look at more reliability. Though the convergence in some organization, which depending on the maturity, the convergence is happening. For example, what we are seeing is more and more chaos engineering kind of principles are coming in conjunction with the DevOps model to bring that, integrate that together. But it's very early days. Still, organizations are maturing in the DevOps adoption itself, and then chaos engineering itself is maturing in itself. It's also to do with the way organization is structured itself, right? A lot of large organizations are very differently structured. The dev reports separately, operations reports separately. And so it's very early days, and probably over a period of time, we'll see the integration, and we'll also see the tools coming together. Today, what's happening is they are looking at chaos engineering as a mechanism, and also looking at DevSecOps as a mechanism to look at more reliability, more security coming in the release cycles to build that reliability from the applications.
Okay. So I'll go from here to Navya to understand a little bit. So today we are talking about creating value, and value is created only when actual user uses whatever we do. So there is no value if we are writing a code, there's no value if we are maintaining a server or a database or anything. It's only when all of these comes together and then somebody is able to use it and generate the benefit that is there, then it makes sense. And when we are talking about continuous delivery, there also we look at the situation that ultimately we have to look at what the customer is getting, what is the experience of the customer ultimately. And from that point of view, if I look at a continuous delivery pipeline, it doesn't end at the development or a staging environment, but it moves to production. Even for that matter, the testing is more on the production with actual users. So from that point of view, coming from a product vendor background, what do you think are the thought processes that you feel are there in terms of a continuous delivery? Is it really happening as continuous delivery, bringing the dev and ops together in terms of tools, or is it like a continuous build?
Sure, and that's a great question, Niladri. What I feel is that it's not a universal answer, to be very honest. It varies from organization to organization. I can say for sure that no two customer that I've worked with, both of them are not approaching DevOps versus SRE in the same way. In a couple of organizations, SRE has more overlap on operations, and DevOps has more overlap on SRE aspects, like defining SLO. So that's one thing off the bat. But just to step back a little bit, right, just around continuous delivery. So when we talk about continuous delivery, the entire concept of delivery can be expanded a little bit more. To your point, right, like, are we stopping at a staging network or a testing network? That is very important. Like, are you just stopping there? Is it actually going to production? That difference, that whole nuance between are we deploying to a test or a staging network versus are we hitting production network will bring about the difference between who is involved. Is it the SRE teams? Is it the DevOps teams? So one thing that I've realized that a lot of organizations who have done it to some extent well is that they differentiate between delivery of code to production, where you have no user traffic hitting the new code or the new build, and then there is the whole release concept, which is when the user traffic starts hitting the different code base or like a new version of a software. And that is accomplished using a number of practices, right? Like, you might be doing A/B testing, you might have canaries, you might have some form of shadow networks where you're like streaming the same kind of traffic that user traffic looks like. So you would be using like a bunch of different these approaches. But at the end of the day, I think Mark brought up a great point around monitoring, right? Like you need to have data across your entire pipeline, be it in test where you're like checking regressions, or with your integration testing where you're looking at things breaking between different components, or in production where you're trying to understand like, what does my monitoring data tell me? It's very important that you have data along the way, because only when you have good data, automation is possible, which is basically the essence of CI/CD.
Great. So from this thought, let me go to Shantanu, as he's coming also from a consulting background. How do you see the entire value stream being covered seamlessly, if I say, with the current tools that are there, both from the CI/CD side and the SRE-led automation side? Do they help in the entire value stream, or they are still creating a silo between them?
That's indeed a very great question, Niladri. So see, how do I see it, I'll say, and I'll try to be brutally blunt on my definition. The whole ecosystem that we are talking about, be it the implementation of continuous delivery through the tool chains or the evolution of it into something what we call as SRE today, to me, they are not evolution. They basically walk in parallel. Maybe the curtain fall of SRE happened a bit late, but it was always there. We used to do monitoring back. We used to have our own mechanisms of doing feedback loops, but it's now standardizing as we are progressing with technology. But in this sense, the best part which you introduced is the word silo. So I did a lot of customer deliveries where they wanted to understand what is the silo that we are talking about in terms of an operational mindset, and how do we break it. So if you think about the silo, this is basically created for a few reasons. One, silos will not be there forever. It forms slowly, and basically it forms because there's a natural process where departments are much more focused about the I'll say confidence with working in a team in the same working space, and eventually employees have a loyalty towards their team which is not that great with the organization, I'll say, in terms of what delivery is to be done. They don't have a clear picture. And as the internal bond between the team solidifies, the trust between the member of different silo teams kind of decreases. And that makes the collaboration across different teams a bit tough. So what we have seen is when we talk about development teams, when we talk about testing pods, when we talk about maintenance, they have a mindset of making their pods the best. Are we doing development in an accelerated way? Are we doing testing and are we on the correct timelines? Are we on a proper maintenance? The maintenance team will have a SLA of their own. So they will focus much more on individual goals. And that individual goal is somehow impacting the overall scope of this implementation. So if we are too much focused on maintaining a system with a 99.5 or plus SLA, we will for sure defer all the release velocity that we want to achieve. So these problems were there, and this is how the silos were identified. Now, how do I break it? So the first point to break it is we have to remove all this individual pod goals and make it a universal goal. Nothing is going to come out of a development team or maybe a testing team's goal of making their team the best if we have to achieve the overall outcome that we intend. Tools are secondary. To me, it's very clear that whatever we have as of now, or the way we do integrations and the way we can design the whole solution, things are doable. But if we do not break down this mindset of creating silos and walking along, no matter how much of an integration we do with the tools or how better we design it, we will not achieve it. So the conclusion is it's more from an operations angle that we have to jointly evolve, and there is no separations of duty in a CD delivery model. If you collaborate from the beginning, and if you have the mindset that there is the shared metrics which is going to help me make my system more better, this is what I expect out of this whole implementation. At the end, the piece is going to be enjoyed by everybody.
Right. Thanks. Great point, Shantanu. So now I'll come to Nith, asking about, if you look at your service, your product that you are looking at. Think from that perspective and tell me how this helps both the delivery side and the operations side, the production side. Does it do it for both, or is it looking at only one side?
Okay.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean, let's hear that first.
Okay, cool. So I think the advantage of going last, people remind you of all the points that you may have missed out, right? So thanks. So yes, so being a vendor for 10 years and now on the other side being an infrastructure provider, we work with e-commerce companies around the world, right? So it actually goes back to everything that the team has mentioned, right? So every company is at a different stage of maturity. But there's also another important point, which there is aspirations and then there are practical challenges. And the practical challenges are that you have a lot of operations engineers whom you want to do SREs. Basically, if you go back and look at the history of all the SREs today, a lot of them are probably Linux admin, system engineers, and operations folks, right? Who are not probably strong on the entire LAMP stack, right? So when you have a team, you have a skill set gap. Obviously, organizations invest in all of these to bridge that gap. But that's probably one of the biggest challenges that enterprises face. I've seen as a vendor and now as somebody who's on the infrastructure side, which is bridging that skill gap, because you have a lot of those people on that skill set, right? So with that said, in spite of all those trainings and certifications, even if you do, computing has become too complex. It's too distributed. There are too many different factors that play a role, right? So in spite of all the testing and monitoring that we can do, it's not enough today. We have to do a lot of monitoring and testing. But there are too many distributed factors that can break, and which is one of the reasons why the term delivery is limited up to build and releasing it to one of those internal environments. And there is a human element that comes before it goes to production, because there are way too many things. There is database caching, there is your proxy caching, there is probably n level of caching that you have, and then your CDN, multi-CDN, all kinds of nuances come in, and then you have your cloud workers and all kinds of other factors that come in. So which is one of the reasons why we see, particularly, let's say in the B2C kind of application companies, there is a human element in spite of the hundreds of releases that we do. And that's exactly what I see in my place as a vendor. While we do have all the access to the tools, if you're a user of a cloud solution provider, they pretty much provide you with all the tools. If you're on AWS, you have all your CI/CD tools, you have your pipeline tools, you have pretty much everything, but it's not necessarily the tool. It's also the talent. It's also how complex your computing is. And it's also those testing and monitoring that you could do. Being able to bridge all of this is a challenge. It's a practical challenge, right? So companies go step by step towards bridging this gap. And that takes some time, which is a maturity. And another challenge that companies face is we are in a very competitive space. So you've got to also take care of retaining some of this top talent, because they are the ones who are taking you through the journey.
Great. It was the next point that we were going towards, is the challenges of how the CI/CD pipeline tools extend to production and integrate with the SRE-led tools. So I'll come to Rajan now and ask about, what do you see with the current set of CI/CD tools? What are the challenges? What are the shortcomings that are there currently, which is not enabling it, or which needs to be taken care of to make it to go towards the production, go seamlessly towards production and have actual customers using it, rather than we testing in our own areas?
So if you look at not only from the tools perspective, just the DevOps tool, but if you look at the environment itself, there are multiple reasons, right? One is the application itself could be a monolith. The customer environment is bimodal. A lot of testing today is still manual, right? QA process. The data versioning or the management of that itself is a key challenge. Then the environments which are way apart, there's an environment drift. And some infrastructure teams are still not following the DevOps culture. So automation, infra automation for the lower and upper environments has to be integrated with the continuous delivery. Tools and technology proliferation, again, is a big challenge because there is a plethora of tools. So just to select what is the right DevOps tool for your organization. Again, if you look at different teams within the organization will be using different set of tools, right? And it's not integrated and standardized from that perspective. In addition to the technical challenge, the culture could provide the orthodox versus engineering-led straight through process approvals, right? Those are still not, your tooling is there, but someone is still putting a manual approval, or the approval process is taking a challenge. As the organization matures, these challenges are overcome in a combination with technology and culture. The zero downtime age or economy is also an important factor. There are too many tools require additional subscription to pay. There's a cost element to it. Then additionally, infra of blue-green strategy, hot-cold environment, release inherently additional in the additional infrastructure space. So a lot of combination of tools, technology, and process challenges. The smaller organizations which are far agile, the organization structure helps it. They are able to limit this CI/CD challenge. They are able to go from build to deploy also, not only deliver, but also do the deployment in agile mode. But again, the complexities from the tooling perspective, different multiple tools, standardization, and also the skills which another Banu just brought up, which is the challenge, some of the challenges.
Okay, so let's go to Mark, because he has a huge experience on consulting with many organizations and quite large ones. I would like to understand from Mark as to what do you see as the challenges that is currently there for the CI/CD pipeline to extend to production and integrate with the SRE-led tools for making it continuous till production and remove the silo that is being created. I'm still continuing, rather not creating, continuing with between dev and ops, whatever we say, even after our DevOps and SRE.
Yeah, I'd first of all like to give a shout out to Santano's comment, reset the goals that are silo goals and replace them with end-to-end service-oriented goals, because that's the first step. It doesn't matter whether the tools are, the processes, people got the wrong goals, you're going to get, the wrong results. But that's the fundamental, underlying point of, how do you align tools is once you get the goals right, then the tools are going to start falling in place if everybody sees the big picture. There's an overlap of practices. I think, as I said before, there's legitimate for SRE to complement DevOps. I almost think it should be Dev SRE rather than DevOps, but because really is development teams working on continuous delivery, trying to complement what SRE is doing in operations is kind of the modern, digital transformed approach for delivery and operations. So in the middle, you've got a lot of different tools that need to overlap, all the way from communication tools, how you collaborate, trying to get alignment around what your communication tools are, the measurement tools, performance management tools, deployment automation tools, security assurance. I have a talk at the DevOps India Summit talking about how we need to replace even the concept of DevSecOps, I think, with continuous security, because security doesn't end at delivery either. There's also security practices that are happening in production. And to me, that's really continuous security is what's needed. Governance tools as well, for compliance and so on. All of these things need to be brought together. I sometimes think there ought to be some kind of unified framework, but probably that's a bridge too far. At least we need to take the frameworks we have and make them work better together. Certainly, again, as in my consulting work, I see still a huge gap in most organizations between real operations and development teams. When they're pulling together DevOps for DevOps, it's often just the portion of ops that has to do with deployment, and a lot of the others aren't getting involved very much. There needs to be a more holistic approach if we really want to accomplish, what the unicorns are claiming they're getting. If you look at the latest State of the DevOps report that was published only a few weeks ago, it says, hey, there's been progress. 10 years ago when we started publishing the report, 14% organizations were at the unicorn level, the high performance level. And now we have 18% 10 years later. And the low performers also improved. There used to be 10% very low, and now there's only 5%. But that leaves you with an enormous, middle that aren't getting there. All right. And a massive middle that are still stuck, not really getting to the high performance level, that are still delivering in terms of, weeks or rather than, hours or days. And I think part of it is this lack of coordination between the different groups and lack of having consistent tooling. In my consulting work, I always preach a word that it's actually a Cherokee word called tahlequah. It means two is just enough. You probably don't want one set of tools because you need some variation for leverage and that. Three is almost too many because it's going to be hard to coordinate. And maybe in some cases 3 is okay, but the point is that you want to try to reduce the total number of tools and then have some governance around tools so that you don't have a lot of tool sprawl. That's going to enable collaboration better between the different groups, whether they're within the delivery side of things or the operation side of things. So those are just some of my thoughts about that experiences.
Great. And from this, I pick up the question for Nit and then to Navya on the point that, do you think there is too much of choice of tools that are there in the market, which is really actually confusing people and moving them away from the actual work that they need to do rather than just think of which tool to take and which tool to implement?
Yeah, absolutely.
The 3 that Mark talked about.
Yes, there is a lot, right? But actually, this is the hot topic in the industry today, right? So this is the hottest job market, which is DevOps and SRE. So naturally, the tools that are there in the market is also, but also there's an interesting thing which we see. Again, it goes back to the people angle to it. The average tenure of people in enterprises is about 2 years, which means they are pretty comfortable with a certain tool in their previous organization. And when they move to a certain organization, they have to unlearn and learn a new tool. So in distributed organizations where people have the freedom, you see all kinds of tools because I'm going to go and buy, I have the budget, so I'm going to buy a tool that I'm comfortable with, right? So we saw organizations going from a centralized to distributed, and then they see this problem and then they have a fix, right? We've seen companies like, at least in my past experience, that Catchpoint, companies like LinkedIn, where they have a centralized team called SiteOps, or where they're responsible for consolidating tools, where the centralized team that is understanding the needs of different teams and having, I think Infosys also has one, right, where they have a centralized team that's responsible for tools and they decide based on the requirement, right? So yes, there's a lot of tools because we know this is the thing in the industry today, but it's about how do you manage that, which people prefer versus what really makes a difference. I think this problem is always going to be there, right? The number of startups we see around.
Great. So let me hear Navya's thoughts.
I kind of concur to everything that was said so far. I don't think it's so much about the tools, to be very honest. There are a plethora of tools there. You have the ability to pick and choose even the most specific feature you need because there's a startup out there who's making a business out of it. So it's not so much about the tools, but it's definitely about how are you bringing things together? You have the right processes in place. And one thing that Nit mentioned around platform operations, that is again becoming a big thing, right? Where you have a centralized tooling team, which is trying to solve this whole thing around, can we have a unified platform across all our tools? It is definitely a holy grail that everybody chases, which is a single pane of glass where all the data feeds in, all the alerts are in the same place. But that's the attempt there, where you're trying to unify as much as possible, give everybody access to the same kind of information so that everybody speaks the same language. So it's not so much about the tools, it's so much more about, do you have the right kind of people? Are they working together? Do you have the right kind of collaboration tools? Do we have the right kind of business goals? And is everybody aligned? So that becomes very important.
So the question that I had was, are the choices of so many tools making it more difficult for people to do the things that they need to do rather than focus more on just the tools itself?
So yeah, again, back to the same thing, right? Like, I don't think the conversation was so much more about the tools. Like, it is true that you're always spoiled with choices. I mean, it's a century where you have a choice for even like the minute different things that you want, right? You'd always be spoiled for choices. But then I don't think it's so much, it depends on how organizations approach it. When if it's just a checkbox, that's when you'll think about, do I have tool A versus tool B? Do I use the whole, discount card so that I can get better discounts with tool A because I'm going to tell them I'm going to use like a mixed approach? That is where you might be like confused and conflicted versus going towards actual capability. But I think people are smart, like at the end of the day, everybody wants to get their work done. So if it's a good tool that'll help them get things done, or if they have to build it in-house, they'll do it. Like, everybody cares. I mean, if I get to work every day, I care if a tool can help me get my work done. If not, like, there's another choice. So we have choices which make it good for us. But then I think the conversation should not be more on the lines of like, our tools the thing that can solve everything for us, our tools the thing that can like help bridge the gap between SRE and DevOps. I think the conversation is a little bit higher than that.
Thanks. So I'll come to Shantanu with a different question here. I have heard about the tools, the culture, the collaboration, all these things. What I would like to know from you is that if we really need to look at a continuous delivery, if we need to look at SRE to make systems more reliable, how important is the point of more focus on the design, the architecture, and the refactoring, both in terms of architecture as well as in terms of like system, as well as the software, as well as the hardware architecture from both sides?
Indeed, a great question, and I don't think I'll do justice to wrap it up quickly, but I'll try to do that. So the whole purpose of evolving with the application or the platform, but evolving with what we are talking right now, is we have seen a tremendous acceleration in the way we are building values through software, be it application or a feature, or be it the platform who is giving you the feature. Now, with that acceleration, we are just trying to cope up with everything that we talk about this value, be it DevOps, be it DevSecOps, be it AIOps, be it all these processes are just trying to address that problem. How can we make the management better? Now, when we talk about the core problem in hand, is the application that we have. So let's say a stack of application we used to have in 2005 or so. Is that something which could be consumed today? The answer to it is maybe. I'll not say no. I'll not say yes. I'll say maybe. Now, why maybe? It depends on what exactly you need that application to do 10 years from now. Because now the transformation seeks how you make your application future ready. And that's when we talk about refactoring. I've seen multiple engagements failing in my purview, where clients have decided to go to the cloud and then grow in the cloud. It does not help. When we take that application to the cloud, the mindset of questionnaire will change. Why? What's the benefit we are getting? We are anyways, choked with the problems that we had before. I don't see cloud helping me. The problem is you have seen cloud in a different way. It was your decision to take it to the cloud and grow it. But once you take the wrong thing to the cloud, it does not solve it. You have to think in a way where this transformation fits the whole objective. So before we do this migration that we seek, that okay, let's think about let's think about a scenario where we need an application which is gonna be at least 10 to 15 years in the future. We can consume that. In order to support those applications or the scale of growth of those applications, do we have a platform that we need, or do we have to redesign the platform of our choice? Do we have to build up a hybrid platform of our choice? Now, once that decision is agreed and solidified, then you come to the factors of how your application is to be rethought through. Is it like you want to go and start refactoring right from the beginning? It's more of a greenfield that you have to do. Or is it something like a mix of brownfield and greenfield that you will take up? And eventually, what I've seen a lot of companies, maybe a composition of 70-30 to begin with brownfield and greenfield respectively. But when they start seeing the benefit of those 30% and the way they are built, they slightly change the fraction to 60-40 and 50-50 and so on. So, and it's obviously a tough choice for a lot of enterprises who invest a lot in seeing it before actually seeing it. But I've seen a lot of companies actually benefiting from this, who are taking that leap of faith that yes, this application, the monolith or whatever is the stack that we're talking about, the ERP suite, it's not going to do justice to the business goal I have in 2025 or 30. Let me rethink my whole application requirement, what I need out of it in the next 5 to 10 years, and let me make that application. But because earlier it was a limitation, maybe from platform, maybe from multiple factors. Now we don't have that limitation. You need a platform, you have it. When I started building up, building up solutions for my team in the cloud, hardly there were 10 to 15, 20 services. Now I can't count. So that's how the cloud services and the platform is growing day by day. So it's giving you the options, and they are also, we work with Microsoft on a regular basis, and we know how much of a feedback they take from us on enhancing their applications or their services as well. So they are trying to improvise their offerings. So the platforms are becoming application ready and requirement ready. So that's from the platform side. It's how you consume it depends on what kind of things you want to host. Now that is something which is a design creativity of your development pods. You have to make, if you need to make the best use of it, there is no limitation now. Be it a refactoring mindset. I've seen a lot of new buddies, or I'll say new, people who come for a refactoring mindset, but they make peace with I'll say brownfield and eventually do it because of the backlog tension that they have. But somehow, if you think that you want to build up a state-of-the-art application, which I really like about the point Nit said, that it depends with the creativity of how these new startups are coming up. You think of it, somebody's making it, or somebody has already made it. So it's not a limitation of availability of these platforms or offerings or services. It's more of what kind of a use case you can think of, and that has all the scope to be implemented these days. Maybe I addressed it on time, Niladri.
Thanks. So from the point of view of the architecture, we need to re-architect in terms of the software, in terms of the hardware. And I would ask both Mark and Rajan after that, is that how do you see the two sets of people that we are talking about, from the continuous delivery side and from the SRE side? How can they work together to make that happen? Because to me, it seems that they have to come together and think of it as a whole to deliver, rather than thinking only from the software point of view and only from the hardware point of view. So what do you think on this architecture point to make it really the continuous delivery to move to production?
You're asking me first? Or?
Yes.
Okay, so I use the word, I'm full of words, by the way. So the suffix ilities, there's all these ilities, compatibility, testability, maintainability. Designing for those ilities is really what's key, and the knowledge of what's needed is often in operations, trying to again impart the what is needed, the wisdom of production, if you like, using SRE terminology, back into development, so that the modules and designs are built with those in mind. I mean, the very best products I've seen have actually already built into them a lot of health checks, which can eliminate the need for a lot of monitoring tools. They've already built in to them a lot of self-checks, which can eliminate the need for a lot of testing tools. They've already built in a lot of security, coded for security considerations. So there's a lot that can be done, and a lot of information that can be offered from folks that are really knowledgeable in operations and even QA for that matter, to improve the way things are designed. It's all about designing for all of these ilities. And when when you design for the ilities, then you're going to get a better product, and you're not going to need as many tools, and it's going to reduce the complexity of what's being deployed and all the complex pipeline infrastructure that are needed to deliver complex products that are made up of multiple applications, each of which have their own pipelines and so on. So that's my opinion, is that there needs to be a lot more talk about designing for illease.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, Rajan.
So from my perspective, right now, I think developers, SRE is at odds. One want to innovate at speed and another is focused on reliability. But I think the ability to test in an economic fashion, predict failures, have a fallback system, observe and measure everything. And the key capabilities, that are the key capabilities which come to mind, and people have to collaborate better in that area. The tools which can do API monitoring, distributed tracing, network level abstraction of service like services for service mesh, cloud-based capability, or capabilities which are in the, say, storage technology like Portworx, which can help them get into the hybrid space and enable the persistent storage. And some other areas which can be focused is faster delivery, reliable and secure CI/CD and CR pipeline, deployment having the right metrics, define, measured, monitor. From platform perspective, designing reliable, scalable, secure infrastructure platforms. From an operate perspective, looking at full stack observability, looking at synthetic monitoring, looking at real user monitoring to create a baseline metrics and validate that at the regular levels. From the optimization perspective, ensure the platform is optimally utilized for the business, right sizing, right workloads, right say placements and also performance levels. And also there are like newer things like FinOps, which are also coming into picture, which also looks at the cost elements of when you're moving to cloud. A lot of customers are realizing probably their cost model is not fitting, or either they're overlapping whatever they expected from the cloud. So all this will help us to bring this, reduce this friction and deliver what business demands, better agility and reliability at the same time.
Great. So from, again, to Nith first, what do you think are the trends then, as Rajan said, taking from cue from him, what do you think are the trends in CI/CD and SRE that you think are happening and will happen in future, which will help in actually breaking down the silos and delivering better customer experience?
Right. So there are different trends in different areas, right? So let's start with the first part, which is from the left side. We've all heard about a shift left, and it has been there for a long time. And we've also heard about on the SRE side, we've heard about SLI, SLAs, and then now observability, right? So there are trends that we know from a practices point of view. But if we actually take a step back and think about these trends, how do they align with the architecture that you just spoke about? So there are trends that we see. If you think about the current trend, a lot of organizations are, a major portion of them, at least based on what I've seen in the past at Catchpoint when I used to work with a lot of customers, and now on the infrastructure side, we have a lot of customers moving from an SOA architecture, but they're moving to microservices, right? They're moving from a VM based to a cloud-based Docker containers kind of thing. And then you have from, while DevOps has been there, people are still struggling with it. So there are some practices, trends that we see. The tools have evolved along with these practices. So we do see these trends changing, but the biggest challenge that is still there is what aspects of it are moving. So the trends are on the DevOps side. The new trend that you see here is there are contents which not necessarily touch or impact the end user when it breaks, but there are aspects of the application which does impact the end user when it breaks. So these two are evolving separately, right? So what I mean by that is all enterprises are now very closely working with cloud and edge providers to be able to do the end user impacting content on a continuous delivery, continuous deployment phase. So there are tighter integrations and tools in the market that you see. And then there are content, even if it goes down, or aspects of the application, even if it goes down, you see there are measures in place where the blue-green deployment methodology is something which is practiced a lot, right? Where, so it's a balance of two. It's actually a loaded question, but it's a balance of these two, which is how do you break this down? And there are tools that allows you to actually break it down, right? And now the trend is almost all the edge providers, if you think about it, they integrate really, really well with the CI/CD tools or the pipeline tools, because organizations are starting to break it down, especially now 2 months down the line, we have Black Friday. These things really make a difference. Now on the SRE side, what we are starting to see is, while I think it was Shantanu who mentioned that SRE monitoring has always existed, it has always existed in terms of silos where they never ever spoke about end user and tying it down to that every packet that is coming in, looking at a query or a CPU utilization. That aspect, while it has been there, it is not all tied together. So that trend is still there. It is pretty strong. But what is also happening is being able to build automation on that trend, which is when you see something impacting, how do you, for example, kill some slow queries, right? These are manual tasks which used to be there before, but now on the SRE side, they're tying this down to observability based automation, right? That is another thing that's picking up, right? So there are a lot of trends that you get to see in every aspect, and each of these aspects are probably dozens of them that you can break it down and look at a trend in each of those areas.
Thanks, Nit. What is your thought, Naveen?
I think Nit really, summed it up really well in the sense that there are always going to be trends. There's always going to be like trends that marketing material will be about, because everybody has to attach to a value at the end of the day, right? So one thing that I definitely think in addition to that is just the aspect of remediation that Anit brought up. So there's also the aspect of like using data to make intelligent decisions and make that happen on an automated fashion. So there is that trend that's obviously always there. People call it AI ops. I'm not a big fan, but that's also another thing that that we see. But one thing that I wanted to address, right, like just to like bring the two aspects together, is that I'm seeing that Shantanu put it really, really well, in the sense that there is the green fields and there is like, you settle with the brown field. But then a lot of organizations are taking on the task of refactoring and moving towards more loosely coupled architectures, right? Like when whatever form of refactoring you do is considered as some form of technical debt, because when you're doing refactoring, you're not basically shipping new features or new products. You are preparing for the future. So that's definitely a trend. It's a very subtle one where like organizations are not always going towards we need to ship a feature, versus they're like, okay, I mean, now is the time for us to re-architect. We know it's technical debt, but it's worth the investment. So I'm seeing that across a lot of different organizations where they're not afraid to take on a technical debt and get that done, because that will get them future ready. So it's a very subtle trend, more on the lines of culture and what people are ready to take on.
Great. So I'll go back to Rajan to ask that, as Navya said, and Shantanu and Nit, everybody is talking about, is that people are moving towards a situation where they are getting into making their architecture loosely coupled. They are getting into refactoring of technical debts. We also see from the system integrator's point of view is that an organization does not have only one single system integrator. I mean, you have a situation where I was just discussing with somebody last week. So the customer wants them to bring in SRE. Now they are only providing level 1 and level 2 support, whereas that's a different company. Whereas level 3 and level 4 support is being done by TCS. Okay, and most probably you will have some other people doing something else. In that situation, how do you think that we can bring in everybody together? What is the investment that is required, or the mindset change, or whatever you call it, is required from system integrators' point of view or service providers' point of view as to make this happen for the customers? Because ultimately we want the customer to be able to have that right experience.
So one change which we are seeing primarily, say, in the banking or retail organization is the operating model change, where instead of looking at the tower-based organization, they're looking at more of a product-aligned organization, where a product team, it could be a retail, say, online banking. That particular team will have people across all the different, say, be it technology, be it processes. And that team could be coming from a person, could be from TCS, another could be from another organization like Accenture, and it could be from internal organization as well. So that is one area we are seeing where at least definitely these two industries, BFSI and retail, are implemented this, and we have seen this across many large organizations. They want to move to that organization. So priority is the product, and every product owner will have all the roles, be it infrastructure role, application role, be it SRE will also be there, who is looking at reliability, as well as the product managers looking at how soon do I release this product to market. So that is one thing which we are noticing across organization is not only at the tool, looking at the operating model being changed to bring this out easy, make it easier for them to operate.
Great. So I'll come to Shantanu on this. What is your thoughts? And if you can also say that, does it mean that the contracts also are getting changed to make the development and the SREs and everybody to work together from, as Rajan said, from various organizations?
I think Rajan mentioned the point very clearly, Niladri, but just to put a perspective to it, yes, it is. Because the problem is, I will quote two instances. So maybe it was 2013, 2014, where I've seen a situation of offloading or outsourcing it to the vendor maintained system, where maybe if I have a workload where there are 3 to 4 vendors, it's a multi-vendor kind of a setup where 3 to 4 vendors are managing the whole operations. And that point in time, it was more of a stack where middleware, Unix, and all these specializations were managed by companies like ours, and maybe a development was something that was kind of in-housed. So we had to collaborate through multiple workspaces. That was the situation back then. Moving forward to 2018, we had an evolution of that setup. The vendors remained same, the kind of profiles from these vendors also remained same, but the customer wanted everybody to be in-housed in a single workspace. That's when we came across this logical problem of in-housing and making the collaboration main center amongst multiple people to increase and enhance the productivity that they get out of it. So they will be driving it. They just don't want to have that whole setup sitting different and having logistical problem, that they mitigated. But there were multiple, I'll say, subtle points that we noticed there. First, there was a change in the whole approach of contracting this engagement. So it was because we were getting cost offloaded from multiple angles, and we had to give them the benefit as well. Then there was obviously a factor of business relationship management. When you talk about the profiles of else, it's all about the way I say it. I will not say that a company A or a company B, company A is branded as L1 or 2, or company C it's branded as L3 and 4. It depends on the kind of profiles and the way the business relationship is managed with the customer. But the best thing is, obviously, the way we handle or serve our customer issues and stuff is getting changed. Now the customers want us to give them the right intellect, the right kind of solutions, and they somehow have that confidence of owning up the whole delivery. So they will own up the whole delivery from the premises, from their leadership, and that's something which is going on. So it's helping the system integrators like us to deliver more values and give them high quality outputs.
Great. So from here, I'll go to Mark on the question on capabilities. What do you think are the capabilities that needs to be upskilled, cross-skilled, or by whatever name you call it, to make these people to have that skill set to be able to do what now Shantanu and Rajan is talking about?
Yeah, so fundamentally, there's a lot of transformation going on. And that's going to require a transformation of skills, right? I mean, if you look at the very, very big picture, it's all about organizations trying to remain competitive, and the way they're doing that is they're trying to be, accelerate their innovation. And in order to do that, they're digitizing everything, the cloud, they're applications and their, their infrastructures to go with it. And underneath all of those digital, transformations, oh my gosh, there's already an existing set of skills required. And the technology continues to evolve at a rate that's alarming. I think I used to say in the old days, the half-life of an engineer's knowledge is about 5 years. In other words, about half of what you know today is going to be still very important 5 years from now. Now it's less than 2 years, right? In Silicon, one of my sons is a Silicon Valley SRE/DevOps/AI engineer, and over the past 6 years, he's had to go through all of those transitions. And he's now a security expert in like 6 years. So, and this is remarkable, the kind of skills that are required to keep moving. You can't stand still, that's for sure. These transformations are challenging, and there's a lack of, existing skills out there. That if you look at the job boards, you'll see tens of thousands of requests for DevOps engineers in just the US alone, and SRE as well, with different titles and so on. But if you look at it, that's what it is. There's just not enough to go around. So upskilling is the key. Take all advantage of the skills you have in-house, strategically recruit people that have the right skills, bring in consultants, and use them in various ways to help you with your transformations, with training, with consulting, helping document things, helping provide content, all of the above. Training itself has to become a strategic part of the transformation, because training is part of all three areas of the digital transformation. Like I say, modernization of the apps, the DevOps with SRE, and the processes, and then the infrastructure as well. All of those things need training and people to upskill. So it's going to be a lifelong commitment to upskilling, and that needs to be supported by strategic training programs and upskilling programs, and mentoring and other aspects of upskilling.
Yeah. So from here, I will go to Nith and ask him, because every one of you are coming from a different background, except for Shantanu and Rajan coming from the consulting. So I would like to understand from each one of you on your take on what are those skill sets or capabilities that needs to be improved to make DevOps and SRE to work seamlessly and be able to deliver what we expect them to deliver. So Nith first.
Okay. Let me start with the SRE side, the side I'm more closer to, right? So, so there are some skills, and the skills that I think really matters is getting back to basics. And getting back to basics is something which starts with understanding what our priorities are, breaking down things, focusing on the priority things, right? A lot of times we're so used to focusing on high level things that we miss out. And it's a soft skill, which basically I'm getting to as a soft skill, right? A soft skill is really matters a lot in the role of an SRE, because you can always start doing log queries and look at which logs, all that. I think that skill there is abundant, but the problem is prioritizing what matters, identifying what really makes a difference to the business. I think that really matters a lot. And the challenge that we have today is you have, again, what I said earlier in the beginning is you have probably 90s to early 2000s. A lot of them on the SRE side were system engineers. For them, everything starts with Linux, open your console and start typing in things, right? Everything starts there, everything ends there. There is a transition process that is going through. People are learning, but still being able to give that picture, like what really happens layer by layer, and being able to prioritize. I think that's another skill, because when they're able to focus on that, then they know what skills, what tools, what languages to focus on, right? So that's one. I think that's my favorite part. On the delivery side, which I'm not really an expert on, but I work with customers, what I see is based on what works for companies is not having, we want to do CI/CD/CD, basically do everything. I don't see a lot of companies do that. Being able to break it down where it's a hybrid model, right? some aspects of it, it works, and some aspect of it, it does not work. So being able to break that down, and it boils down to talent management. You will not have an entire team who's capable of doing everything, right? You're going to have somebody who's really strong on the ops side. You're going to have somebody really strong on the dev side. Now, there is some amount of learning that goes, but if you have 20 years old experienced person on the ops side, it's going to be a little challenging for that person to become a good developer as well. But guess what? He or she has intense experience, solid experience on the other side. So it's also about bring that balance on the management side. But technology is changing every 5 years, so it's so important for us to continuously learn. And I'll conclude with one question. I think it was an event a couple of years ago at PayPal, where the question was, I think back then everybody was talking about DevOps. How do we take an operations person and ask them to think like a developer? How do you take a developer and ask them to think like an operations person? It's challenging fundamentally, right? The way they've been doing for 10, 12 years. But that trend, if you ask now, a person who's passed out of college, 3, 4 years experience, they start thinking in that way. They want to be that full stack guy who understands, right? So it's about balancing while people change. Now, this may again change 5 years down the line. So it's always that balance.
Navya?
Sure, and I definitely want to say that I concur with like the learning and development part, upskilling. Those are very important aspects. One thing that I'd like to add is just having high-level business goals, right? That is socialized across the organizations. Some of the organizations that I see who are able to do some extent of bringing DevOps and SRE teams together, what they're doing really well is having high-level business goals. This could be in the forms of SLOs. This could be in the form of KPIs. This could be in the sense of some form of reliability goals, but it is shared across development teams, DevOps teams, ops teams, as well as SRE teams. And that has worked beautifully because you're no longer creating separate incentives for your DevOps versus your developer teams. So when you're continuing to, like, let's say, applaud new product releases, it becomes extremely difficult for you to incentivize your operations teams. So it's very important for organizations to even think about incentives in a way that is going to treat everybody equally, right? Like if it can't just be about pushing new products. It should also be about like keeping the stability. It should also be about like, are we automating enough? Are we removing enough technical debt? So that whole aspect of ensuring you do that really well is important. And at the end of the day, I think it's also about a common language and documenting as much of that as possible, because if something's working today, like let's say an interaction between a developer and an SRE is working fine, make sure that is captured and that gets, that gets routed into your learning and development. Make sure that you're using what you're seeing in the field to train your workforce. So that becomes extremely important as well. And then finally, one thing that I also want to point out is that not a lot of organizations are making use of the aspect of allowing some budget for failure, right? So we're talking about like error budgets, but then the concept is just still very nascent and it's not being used across the organization. So making use of things like error budgets to allow for some amount of failures will give operation teams and DevOps teams confidence, and your SRE teams will have more confidence that your developers and your DevOps folks are doing the right thing. So making use of all of these trends in the right way to incentivize people and create the right culture would be like the key at the end of the day.
Thanks. So we don't have much time, but without one more question, we cannot close this. And that is one important aspect of security. So I'll go to Mark first, asking about how can DevOps and SRE together strengthen security?
Yeah, so again, this is a talk that I'm doing at the DevOps India Summit. I talk about continuous security instead of SecDevOps, or just, SRE is concept of security is more about defending the production environment once things are in production, whereas DevOps is more about preventing security problems coming into production through different channels of the software and the way things are working in development. So fundamentally, it needs a reset of mindset to start with. The developer, the security teams, the ops teams, the QA teams need to really collaborate and think about the big picture of security rather than just, they're part of security. And certainly there are things that can be done. I mean, that if you take, chaos engineering, applying it to security and having both the dev teams and the SRE teams participate in that and building, security defenses better based on the results of security chaos engineering. The idea of purple teams where you don't just have a red team simulating attacks and somebody in a blue team goes off to figure out what to do about it. Instead, you have them collaborate together closer. You hear a lot about zero trust. So the concepts in zero trust architectures, some of the requirements need to come from the production side and the implementations need to come from the development side. So there needs to be a lot of collaboration around security, zero trust architecture designs and things like that as well. So those are certainly some thoughts.
Thanks. So Rajan, what is your thoughts on the security part?
Yeah, I think it has to be addressed end to end, not only whatever Mark covered, data at rest, in motion, as well as in use, right? And then it has to be covered through entire journey in the DevOps using maybe DevSecOps process, then they are using SAST, DAST, and all this, and VAPT, maybe post implementation. So it has to be covered throughout the life cycle, and with the recent attacks and continuously increasing securities, like the most critical thing in the entire reliability of the entire application as well as business, and the data privacy and all the rules and laws and regulations becoming more stringent. So it's an area of say the top priority for most of the CIOs and also the businesses.
Thanks. So I'll go to Shantanu with a little twist to the whole thing. Is from the system integrator's point of view, what do you think is necessary for making sure the people who are providing these services, how do you enable them to make them think more from the security point of view and be able to bake in security into the entire pipeline and extend it to production?
You reminded me of my topic last year in the summit. So I kind of had a deja vu just now, but I'll just try to wrap up quickly from this point, Niladri, because this is a very important topic and close to me. I've invested 2 years on this. The first thing is we kind of have a very clear picture on breaking this mental silo. Okay, this is a joint effort in terms of owning up. So when we talk about baking in security by design, it can only be baked up if you are clear that I will not push anything which eventually later somebody will catch up. So somebody will catch up. If not today, some point in time tomorrow. And people are smart out there. If somehow they skip it in a release before it goes to production, somebody after it is in production will catch up. So that will get caught up. Now the thing is, if they are very clear that I know if I design something unintentionally, intentionally, I don't think anybody will do it, but unintentionally, then that is a problem. It's always good to be caught earlier. So if that mental silo of not getting caught and just letting go their feature as soon as possible in production, that has to go. So this is a joint effort and this has to be done. So this automation culture of resolution has to be in place, where security team and the development team along with the testing team, they have to sit and see the impact of all these CVEs that they scored their feature against. Second is the SAST and DAST that Rajan just mentioned. These outcomes are to be evaluated from the first step. Now, when we promote from any uncontrolled environment to a controlled environment, we have a mindset of believing that uncontrolled environments are only best to test the features and if their functionalities are working fine. And when we go to controlled environments like acceptance tiers and eventually to the prod sets, it's when we start thinking about security, integration, components, and all these things. If you have to evaluate your entire application's security posture, start getting used to the SAST and DAST composite very early from the uncontrolled environment. See how your scores against the application CVEs, or there are there are multiple tools like Fortify, Checkmarks from very old days. Leverage these tools from the development pod. So these outcomes are to be evaluated and identified much earlier to increase your reliability factor later on from a security side. And the last part, which Navya just quoted, and I like that point, have a mindset to own up issues and failures. If you are doing something wrong, admit it, make it better. It's not about what you do. It's not about how you do. It's about what exactly is done at the end by everybody, which matters. So if that product is something which is unhackable, I'll say not unreliable, I'll say too much reliable, it's something which everybody appreciates, that's a part of your effort, a joint effort. So own up to issues, own up to failures, and make something better, because when it goes public, it's all that you will have to show. So if from a SI point of view, whenever we talk about the engagements or about any DevOps related assessments with customers, these are the top 3 things we solidify our posture on. And somehow I believe that everybody that we talk through and every engagement we have been a part of, we have been able to be a part of with a customer through our sources, through our representatives with this mindset in place.
Thanks. So we'll come quickly to finish off with with the 2 further questions. That is there one for Nit, as how do you see in your area of, as you're working with the infrastructure side, how are you building up that security capability in that area?
Cool. So security is one thing which it starts with a lot of times we have compliances in place for prioritizing security, whether it is SOC, PCI, HIPAA, all kinds of, we have a lot of compliances, right, for a company to adhere to, right? I think it's important to take it serious as a first step, right? Because the compliances ensure that you have your controls in place, ensure that you have your systems in place, whether it is the controls, the policies, the monitoring, the business continuity planning, the disaster recovery planning, and all of that. These compliances enforce that you prepare for these, you plan for these, right? So it's important that large companies, this is a serious business. They have dedicated people who are focusing on this. It's a smaller organization where this is a part-time thing just for the heck of getting the certifications, right? So first step, take that serious. 2, have your tools in place, which is also part of the earlier question or the initial question that we had. Tools, security is increasingly important, which is why we see the surge of tools like Splunk and SIEM tools like Splunk and Sumo and others, where your security audit logs and all other kind of security logs are now a part of your other DevOps or SRE monitoring tools all in a single place, because so you can take security seriously, right? So the tools are there. It is also about planning, preparing, and ensuring that you have the right data and filling in those gaps and having all those. I think it boils down to having all those planning in place for security and having access to data and being able to respond to these risks. And of course, there are plenty of tools out there to be able to do that.
Sure. So the last question to Navya is, how does a product vendor building up that security mindset, the security knowledge that is required to the entire team to ensure that the products that they are building are secure enough for the customers?
Sure. I mean, to be very honest, it's not easy, because with things like any kind of outage or anything breaking, right? Like a customer realizes the value of, let's say, a security breach when the breach happens. It brought up a great point, right? Like a lot of these compliances are like check boxes. You get it done on a yearly basis, because of which you don't think about things ground up. Just to give you one instance, very recently, in fact, based on some of the synthetic monitoring data that we were collecting, we started seeing a spike in the SSL handshake times, which is basically a very important component of implementing security, which is TLS 1.3 now. And we were trying to like debug and understand what was happening. And because some of the backend components, be it your infrastructure, be it your code, they're not built in a way to give you enough intelligent cues on what broke from a security perspective. So when we talk about adding in the right hooks and building code in such a way that you're emitting monitoring data. So Mark brought up a great point on If you build functionalities into your code, you don't need testing. Probably you don't need monitoring. You're thinking about this ground up. When you go into the design stage, when you're like starting development, right, then you're thinking about building in the right hooks to do health checks, to do auto remediation, and security should also be a similar component. So to be very honest, from a product standpoint, it does not happen very easily. Whenever there's something that breaks is when customers start thinking about it and users start thinking about it. And that's just human psychology, right? Like when something breaks, you want to pay it more attention. But then, yeah, I really hope that we're not there yet, where we're building in the right kind of security hooks at the right places to have enough data. But I hope that we get there. So that's definitely something that I would root for.
Great, thanks a lot. It was a very enlightening experience. So what I could gather from all of you is that we are talking about the culture, we are talking about the mindset change, we are talking about the change in the architecture and refactoring, we are talking about looking at it grounds up to have everything in a holistic manner from both the domain perspective, how the experience should be for the users, as well as from the entire holistic IT system point of view, and bring it all together. And that's where the convergence happens with the tools and the people together. It's not just the tools. So great. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your time. And it has been a wonderful experience. We could carry on doing it all through the night, but I think everybody has their work. We will catch up again sometime. But this definitely should be a good discussion for the audience to hear. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.